So the other day, I was browsing around r/punishing gray raven to find some Nanami memes to make my day a little brighter, and then I came across this post. My thoughts on affixes as a longtime player and a heavy spender. You see, this title gave me a thought. With the release of Lilith enabling a fully functional plasma team, I think it's high time that we talk about affixes. Now, if you don't know what affixes are, just a quick rundown. Affixes are basically elemental effects that were added onto the latest characters alongside their pre-existing base elements. These effects are somewhat minor, like glaciation creates a cryo AoE field, or dark flow nullifies effects, whatever that means. That, however, isn't the extent of what affixes are being used for. You see, when triggering an affix, you instead deal the affix damage instead of your base elemental damage, meaning that you can revolve your entire team around one affix. So given the gameplay mechanisms, it's considered more as a secondary element, not to be confused with a new element since the affixes are tied to their original counterpart, like plasma is tied to lightning, glaciation is tied to ice, and dark flow, no surprise, is tied to dark. That means that if you're running a plasma team, lightning buffs and debuffs can work for plasma damage. And real quick, to give you a good idea over how it works, basically a character needs to possess an affix. This essentially means that they have an alternative rotation that allows them to build their own affix meter. Once the character builds the meter, they will need to trigger it. The trigger will depend on the character, but it's typically done with the ult. Once triggered, the meter will begin to drain over time. During that time, the character will be able to deal the affix damage until the meter is fully drained. So yeah, that's the TLDR version of affixes. Anyway, going back to this Reddit post, I don't normally do this, but I thought it'd be interesting to look into this post and have a discussion about affixes and gauge what people think about this new system. It's also important because Solon did say he wanted to align our feedback with CN, and thanks to the integrated versions, we are catching up real fast. So I think it's best we start addressing some concerns. So let's get into it. Hey everyone, my top up is nearly 30k rainbow cards. I also love both of Kuro's games with all of my heart, PGR and Wuba, and play both of them a lot. They're great game developers and I enjoy supporting them with my time and money. There are very few games that can match or exceed the satisfaction of the combat in Kuro games, which is true. So about affixes. Personally, they feel forced in and shoehorned. Leaps also suffered as a result because leaps lately have been less about making old, outdated characters smoother and more fun, and more about giving them affixes with maybe a cool animation and no other tangible benefit that old leaps used to have. Okay, to a certain extent, this is true. You see, when looking at the three more recent leap skills, Crimson Weave, Balter, and Darren, we see that affixes were integrated into their leap skills. The leap skills gave them an alternative rotation which allowed them to activate their affixes, but in regards to tangible benefits, it didn't do much in the way of smoothing the gameplay experience of the base character. In fact, I find it a little disruptive, like for Crimson Weave's case where the Dark Flow orbs replace my regular orbs, and I want to use my regular orbs to charge my spirit gauge. It just gets in the way. The only exception here would be Darren, where you can immediately spend all of her energy into ults instantly. But aside from that, leaps seem to move away from updating a character to feel better and in line with the current generation, and move towards affixes. Okay, moving on. Gen 2 units compared to Gen 1 units felt massively innovative beyond just the, oh, fancy time lag calculation. Their orb generation and management is better, they have more options when dealing with tough enemies, and unique mechanics in general, more utility like off-field shred and damage. Gen 2 is a world of difference compared to Gen 1. But Gen 3 compared to Gen 2 feels like they didn't innovate at all. Obviously, their technical skill as developers improved, animations look better, graphics look better, etc. But that's not what I'm talking about. In terms of the game's power creep cycle, Gen 3 units basically do more damage or shred more or whatever. They don't do much that's new or exciting to be worthy of a moniker like Gen 3 aside from affixes. Hold up, have we settled on what Gen 3 is? Gen 1 and Gen 2, those labels were created by the community, not Kuro. But here's the thing about Gen 1 and Gen 2. We were able to settle on what Gen 2 frames were because the defining characteristic that separated Gen 2 from Gen 1 was the existence of time lag calculation. The added bonus of having better orb management mechanics only made the chasm between Gen 1 and Gen 2 wider. This was simply the effect of the game's combat system growing and evolving. Either way, there was definitely a clear distinction that was set. Funny thing is that time lag calculation didn't exist to create a new generation. It existed to solve the problem of ult animations eating into buff and debuff timers. In fact, characters like Selena Capriccio were updated to have TLC even though she released before the patch where TLC was even implemented. But giving her TLC elevated her into Gen 2 status. The point is, using generations as a point of measurement is kind of pointless, especially when we're unclear what defines a Gen 3 unit. Okay, let's continue. But affixes don't justify Gen 3 at all in my opinion. Wait, okay. So we aren't sure if this is a Gen 3 unit. Like, what is it? Okay, never mind. All affixes feel like to me are shoehorned forced method of justifying Gen 3 as a label in an effort to compel you to pull these characters because without them, you cannot engage in affix content and thus fall behind in Warzone and Pain Cage. Again, generations were created by the community, not by Kuro. Affixes don't exist because they wanted to create a Gen 3 unit because generations do not exist to Kuro. Anyway, it doesn't feel like the mostly natural progression that Gen 1 and Gen 2 had. Okay, I don't want to repeat myself, but we'll just keep going. I say mostly natural because time stop isn't a very organic feeling way to increase a unit's power compared to having unique mechanics, such as blocking, parrying, pulling enemies. It feels artificial. On top of that, I've never been a meta puller in the first place. I only pull for characters that I like or want, as it should be. I gravitate primarily towards male DPS characters and female support characters to buff my male DPS, and I take a similar approach to Wubo's Gacha as well. This is why I have a triple S plus lead with no Pyro. It's also why I have a triple S Watanabe Nightblade and no Stigmata, and I'm also skipping Selena. Despite this, my character's deep levels of investment in addition to my own high skill level allows me to bounce between hero and legend in Warzone, and even occasionally retain legend depending on which teams are being called on. Therefore, I am skipping 9 out of the last 15 released characters, mostly because I don't want to engage with or support the whole affix thing. There is one good thing about Kuro's implementation of affixes though. They don't force you into it at all. Even though there is an affix Warzone, its position is shared with another basic element, allowing you to not engage with the mechanic at all if you don't want to or don't have affix characters. Sure, you will lose points if you don't play affix if you have characters that use it, but the fact that Kuro gives you the option instead of literally forcing you to lose points in Warzone is something that should be commended. PGR has always had a reputation for being a generous and casual friendly game. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise. They're probably just salty Warzone modders, but PGR is what you make it on an individual basis. At its core, it is a casual game. Thank you. That should be the bottom line of PGR. PGR is what you make it on an individual basis because at its core, it is a casual game. Another good thing that affixes kind of do is help keep power crept units meta for longer, providing more usability for units in general. For example, you could have Crimson Weave power crept by a new unit, but the new unit may not have Crimson Weave's affix, meaning Crimson Weave can still be used in one way. And that's the end of this whole this whole post. So here's what I think about this post. I think the conversation over affixes has been derailed by the whole Gen 3 labeling. Like, I can see what this person is talking about if it's set in stone that Gen 3 frames are frames with affixes, but it's nothing concrete. Aside from that concern, one of the biggest problems that this post addressed is that affixes seem to be poorly implemented and shoehorned into the game, which seems to be true. Remember when I was talking about time lag calculation? TLC exists to solve a problem. The issue with affixes is that it's a solution in search of a problem. Now, that doesn't mean that I should dismiss this whole affix mechanic, because I do think it has the potential to breathe new life into the combat of the game. It changes a little on how we build our characters with our memories, and it breaks the monotony of the standard mono-elemental teams. On top of that, multi-rotational characters are kinda cool. But going back to the solution in search of a problem issue, currently we have no other reason to use it other than when Warzone or PPKH has an affix buff. Outside of that, affixes feel a little out of place and don't have a reason to be there as a meaningful option for players to use. But that's my opinion over affixes, really. Now let's go down and check out what some of the responses to this post are like. My thoughts on affixes from someone who's not good at the game. I returned to the game somewhere around the BRS collab, not because of it, so not really old player, but not a newbie. I have some mixed feelings about affixes. I like the idea that you can have a different rotation to play your character. I like the idea that older units can get leaps to stay relevant longer. I don't like that affixes content is harder to experience. It's for big boys who are in Hero and Legend Warzone at 1.8 mil damage PPC. I know you can just play with affix damage rotations for fun in any game mode, but I would like to have that damage bonus for affixes in other game modes. I want to have that incentive to use it because maybe doing an affix rotation is fun, but I think it would be even more fun if you could do the rotation and deal good damage on top of that. If for Norman you already have 30% and 20% buff for Nile Dark damage, why not have another 25% buff for Glaciation? I mean, for this case, why not have another 25% buff for Dark Flow? But I get what you're saying. I would definitely like to see them implement affixes at the lower ranks of the endgame modes of Warzone and PPC. I think that'd be really cool. I don't like how you need some characters for affix teams. I remember when I pulled Pyroth and did the class tutorial, and that was the only time I used Blue Orb on her. I didn't have Darren, and obviously Lilith wasn't even out yet, so I was basically locked out of the Plasma Beam gameplay. Even though I wasn't really interested, it kind of felt bad to have a character who was like 80% functional. Meanwhile, older characters had all their kit available without any side quests. I also don't like how the leaps for affixes are just to be affix batteries. I like leaps on Vera Garnet and Alpha Crimson Abyss. For me, they felt like a buff and new cool moves added to the characters, allowing me to have more fun playing them solo or not. With leaps on Karenina, Crimson Weave, and Stigmata, it felt like Rick and Morty meme, your purpose is to fill affix stacks. The characters stay relevant for longer, but they don't really do more damage and do cool things with the leaps for themselves. They're now a sidekick who serve new Gen 3 characters. Again, with the Gen 3 characters, people. Like I said, I'm not really good at the game and not a try-hard competitive player. Been at Hero Warzone 2 times. Probably said something wrong, but that's how I feel about it. That's completely alright. Your opinion matters too. I want to put it out there that Karenina's leap does streamline her base rotation in addition to having an affix rotation, but you do make a good point that leaps seem to be a way to implement affixes instead of streamlining a character to feel better. At least if we look at the last two leaps. Though again, Crimson Weave feels a little disruptive, at least to me. But you also gave me a thought that affixes might be running into the same problem with elemental effects in WUWA, like how spectral stacks deal dot, but really they're just a hot potato mechanic to empower some characters. Alright, let's take a look at one last comment. Oh, over here. A few things I'll note. Affixes being forced means absolutely nothing. You'll have to use the fire team in the fire war zone, so you got to use the plasma team in the plasma war zone. That's really all it is. I don't really think that's what the person means by being forced. I think what the person means is like the mechanic of affixes were just slapped onto the game, and that was really it. And speaking of Plasma Warzone, you can choose between just having a full lightning team or a plasma team. Obviously, the plasma team has greater benefits, and especially when plasma is loosely tied to lightning. If you just put Anonymy in there, Anonymy will still take advantage of the lightning buff itself, while plasma, obviously gets the plasma buff. So it's a huge deal. Okay, so on to the next point. Leaps definitely suffered. Yeah. I do think you're overselling the jump from Gen 1 to Gen 2 a bit. You aren't wrong on things they improved on, but it comes off a little too strong. Comparing Gen 3 to Gen 2 was kind of moo. You talked about how Kuro didn't innovate enough to justify the phrase Gen 3, but I think you missed the fact that generations don't actually exist. They are fan terms made by the community. Kuro doesn't think Gen 1, Gen 2, Gen 3 is just the next construct, which is true. And again, I don't even know what in the world is Gen 3 at this point. Again, but it's made by the community, it's determined by the community. So, that's just how it is. And finally, also we'll be getting affix weakness bosses. So that point about you aren't forced to use them is about to age like milk. Fast Lamau. The poster did respond, but I think you could read it on your own. Yeah, that's the general gist of this post. But I wanted to start a conversation about affixes, as this looks to be the future of PGR. Anyway, what do you think about affixes? Do you like them? Do you not like them? Is it too early to tell? Put it down in the comments below, because I'm curious about what everyone thinks about this new system. And if you like this video, do leave a like and maybe subscribe. And thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next one. Bye!